to everyone, folks, and welcome to this latest edition of the Mortal Kombat Franchise Documentary. I'm delighted this evening to be joined by the one and only Tracey Douglas, who played the character Vorpex in Mortal Kombat Conquest. And before I bring you on to Mortal Kombat Conquest, Tracey, have you any sort of memories of the early sort of Mortal Kombat movies back in 1995, 97? Were you aware of them, or were you aware of the Mortal Kombat franchise before you got involved in Mortal Kombat Conquest?
Mortal Kombat was so huge that it was hard not to be aware of both the movies and the video games. I didn't get to play the video games very much. I wasn't that skilled. However, I would watch people at the arcade play and be thrilled by all the gore and the excitement and the action. And I am somebody who enjoys fantasy movies. And so, yeah, I saw the movies and was a fan of those as well. The big one I thought was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and in terms of Mortal Kombat Conquest, Tracey, how did the opportunity come about for you to get cast in the role of Vorpex? Did you go through auditioning process, or were you recommended for the role?
I went through the audition process. If I remember correctly, I had about 3 total auditions. The initial one where it was more general, and then it got narrower as I got closer to getting the role. And I also had to do a kind of a movement screen test where I worked with one of the stunts people, and they kind of got a sense of what I could do regarding martial arts stunts. I did have a little bit of a background in Aikido and some Taekwondo, so I was pretty well prepared to do the little bit that I could, and I think that that was really helpful for me.
And I suppose, Tracey, in terms of the character of Vorpex, I suppose she's a new sort of character that was created for Mortal Kombat Conquest. Not many people are aware of. This is the great Kung Lao, not the Kung Lao that his descendant that's featured in the Mortal Kombat game. So they obviously had to create backgrounds for some characters that, in terms of Mortal Kombat Conquest, the characters Zero and Taja are new characters as well. And your character Vorpex was a new character. So going into that auditioning process, you probably had a script for this character Vorpex. You probably had a drawings of what she probably would look like in terms of costume and wardrobe. But apart from that, you had no sort of background, sort of history in terms of being able to look back in video games or previous movies. So, because she was very much a new character, and her success obviously would depend on your portrayal of her and obviously the writing.
So, right, absolutely. Vorpex was new to the MK universe, and we did not know where the writers were going to take us. That was something that developed as the series developed, as for us newer characters. It kind of was something that was flexible and depended on our portrayals. And so the scripts that came were surprises to us. We didn't know where we were going to be going, and we got some sense of direction as we went along about how to develop our characters. And as we did so, it led to more development, and that's how the evolution of the characters kind of went. So I didn't know at the beginning of the season where Vorpex was going to end up. I had no clue. So it was a delightful surprise to see all that developed for her.
Yes, she was very much a mysterious character. She was sort of playing, all we knew about Vorpex was her intentions were never the best. In terms of her own sort of character, she was always trying to watch her own back. But in terms of making allies, she would stab you in the back in a split sort of second. So she sort of aligned herself up with sort of the bad guys in terms of playing the bad guys off each other in terms of survival, in terms of the early sort of episodes in Mortal Kombat Conquest. So it was a big sort of character change when the whole background of Vorpex came out in terms of this Shiva and Princess and this alien sort of hive sort of character that was creating sort of spawn. It was obviously like, where did this start to come out? It came out of the blue as such.
Yeah, that was a blast to get to see that develop. So much fun. When I got the role and knew that I was going to be playing a bad guy, that was super neat to get to learn that. And then as it developed and got to see, yeah, Vorpex was wicked smart. she was playing off all of the characters, and she had plans of her own and how she could use everything to her own advantage while also holding in her pocket. She had plans on a really grand scale. So that was a lot of fun to get to do, and such great actors to get to play off of, Bruce Locke, Jeffrey Meek, of course, Kung Lao, Paulo Montalban. Our cast was spectacular. So I think that the writers and Larry Kazanoff, they had a lot of ability to create some really fun stuff.
Yeah, and I suppose Tracy, that famous green costume of Vorpex, it was every single second, every single episode, that all you would see would be that sort of green costume. It sort of light up the sort of screen. It was almost like we never had another item of clothing in our sort of entire life. And what was that sort of, to still have that sort of costume or outfit?
I do joke that I keep it in my closet, but unfortunately, no. When people would ask me about that, I'd say, yeah, it was made of dental floss and fabric, and that was about it. But, the costume designer, Beverly, was spectacular. And it was super fun to get to have something that was so distinct and unique.
And in terms of a new character, Vorpex, in terms of the series Mortal Kombat Conquest, it's fair to say she really started to hit it off, because there was never really an episode that she wasn't really involved in, and maybe it was nearly every sort of second episode, and even she had probably played the scenes in part of one. So she was definitely a very sort of central character. People look and say Shang Tsung, and people will look at Shao Kahn, but in terms of that, Vorpex played a more prominent role than your Scorpions, than your Sub-Zeros, than your Reptiles, that were very much the cornerstone of the Mortal Kombat franchise, in definitely in the TV series Mortal Kombat Conquest.
That was a surprising development to me too. Sub-Zero was so beloved. As you said, Scorpion, these characters were so huge in the universe. So getting to have Vorpex develop for me was really such a rich experience to get to have. I really enjoyed that a lot. It felt really special.
Yeah, and I suppose, Tracy, when you look at the character of Vorpex, I suppose in terms of creative that sort of, she obviously gained herself mortality and immortality in terms of taking the powers from her own mother. And I suppose that obviously opens up opportunities then in terms of playing, being a character being made available for future sort of video games and future sort of TV series and sort of cameo roles. So in essence, in terms of Vorpex not being sort of mortal, but obviously it opens up the opportunities for her to appear further down the line in the Mortal Kombat series.
I have always longed to see Vorpex in a game. That would have been spectacular. And to get to be a part of the movie and the series in the future, that would be an amazing thing to get to see. I really loved playing her a lot. And I thought she had a lot of flair, a lot of excitement. So hopefully that'll get further developed.
Yeah, and in terms of the fight scenes and the martial arts scenes, there was an awful lot of them in terms of, obviously there was an awful lot of acting, but in terms of the martial arts scene and kicking butt or kicking ass, as the same goes, did you really sort of enjoy that? And have you played any sort of roles similar to that sort of fantasy sort of fight sort of similarity? We all know that it's a made up sort of universe, so in terms of that, you can really have fun in terms of that sort of violence, because it's not a real life portrayal of violence.
Right. Those scenes were such a blast to film. I have to tell you, our stunt people were spectacular. And I'm not sure if people know this about the stunt double for me, but it was a young man. For the life of me, I can't recall his last name, but his first name was Johnny. And he had to put on my costume. And so whenever you see Vorpex in a fight, you'll notice that she's got a green cape, and that's to hide the other things that I don't have. And the artistry, it was incredible to get to watch how they choreographed those scenes. The fight coordinator, John, was amazing. Our stunt doubles were fantastic. And I think, yeah, that was such a thrilling thing to have be a part of the show, because the fights were spectacular.
Yeah, I suppose I've already spoken to Bruce Locke, and I was speaking to Angelica Bridges there earlier on who played also Old Mages in terms of Mortal Kombat. And she taught me, and a similar question I'm going to put to you, in terms of when it was released, and obviously Netflix coming out 2 or 3 years just afterwards. Obviously, the timing, I suppose, one sense you're probably delighted when it did come out, but if it had come out 2 or 3 years and obviously got onto a platform, a video sharing sort of platform like Netflix, I suppose the possibilities would have been endless. You could be talking about 5 or 6 seasons, because it seemed to me like when you reached the 22 episodes that you had an awful lot more in the pipeline that you wanted to go and explore for future seasons.
I agree. The timing of it was unfortunate. There was a lot more that could have been done with that series. And I think you're absolutely right. With the platforms that are available now, with all of the content, there would have been more of an opportunity. And it's a bummer that it didn't get to happen, because it was one of the best experiences of my life to get to be a part of that series. It was a great cast, a great crew, so much fun to get to do. And maybe someday they'll get to do something like that again with Mortal Kombat Conquest, hopefully.
And I suppose, Tracy, in terms of your portrayal of Mortal Kombat Conquest, one thing you have to say is it struck an audience that was appealing to teens, appealing to older adolescents, and it struck a variety of chords. And it's not really camp in sort of nature. You sort of have it developed a sort of seriousness to every show. Every show has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And in terms of looking forward now, you probably said it's tone. I suppose the new Mortal Kombat movie in 2021, they're saying it's going to be along the lines of a Dark Knight, a sort of a Joker, a sort of an R-rated sort of thing. And I suppose with modern times, it's probably more acceptable now in terms of stretching the boundaries of Mortal Kombat. I suppose in terms of 1995 and 1997, in terms of that sort of graphic nature of violence, was probably wouldn't have been acceptable.
Completely agreed. I'll be curious to see what it is that they do to stretch that, because, I kind of, when you talk about that, I kind of think about Game of Thrones. I think about Carnival Row and how those are darker, fantastical sort of series. And so I'll be curious to see what they do there. That's a route that seems as if it'll be really rich for them to plumb.
And I suppose, Tracy, 2 last questions to ask you now. First one is if the producers were looking on there and they obviously wanted to have a sort of a flashback into Shang Tsung's sort of past, and obviously he's a sorcerer, he sort of lives forever, and they threw up sort of imagery of his time with Vorpex. Would that be a cameo role that you'd be interested in playing in the new Mortal Kombat 2021 movie in January? If the producers were looking on, would it be a 2 thumbs up from Tracey Douglas?
Heartbeat, in a heartbeat. What a fun opportunity.
So last question for me, Tracy, in terms of the character of Vorpex, probably the most difficult question I'd ask you. If they left 2 blank sentences in the dictionary and underneath the character of Vorpex, and they asked Tracey Douglas, obviously your portrayal of Vorpex, what would you like those 2 sentences to read to sum up the character of Vorpex?
Exquisite and cunning.
Exquisite and cunning. On that note, Tracey Douglas, an absolute pleasure talking to you this evening, reliving your memories of your time in Mortal Kombat Conquest, playing the character of Vorpex, a character that we say that knew how to survive in our darkest hour and come out the brighter side of us when everything else seems to be up against her. Tracey, pleasure talking to you this evening, reliving your memories of Mortal Kombat, and hopefully, please God, we get to see you in that cameo role in a year, maybe in time to come. Tracey Douglas, a pleasure.
Jim, thank you so much for the opportunity. It was a pleasure to talk with you as well.
Fight.